There are ghost stories, and then there are stories where the ghosts supposedly became part of the evidence. In 1897, in the hills of Greenbrier County, West Virginia, a young woman named Zona Heaster Shue was found dead. At first, there wasn't a murder investigation. There wasn't a criminal suspect. There wasn't even much reason, at least officially, to believe that anything terrible had happened. Zona was simply dead. But her mother didn't believe the story she was being told. And according to that mother, something or someone came to her in the night. Not once, not twice, but 4 times. And the apparition she claimed to see wasn't there to say goodbye. It was there to accuse a murderer, her own husband. The story that followed would become one of the strangest chapters in West Virginia history. Because eventually, Zona's body was dug out of the ground. An autopsy was performed, and the results appeared to match what her mother said the dead woman had told her. Edward Shue was arrested. He was tried for murder, and he was convicted. Today, the story is remembered as the case of the Greenbrier ghost. And here's the question we're going to try to answer tonight. Did a ghost really help solve a murder, or was there something much more human and perhaps even more disturbing behind the story? This is Appalachian After Dark, and tonight we're going back to Greenbrier County, West Virginia. Before she became a ghost story, Zona was a real person. Her name was Zona Heaster, although she was generally known by her middle name Zona. She lived in Greenbrier County, West Virginia during the late 19th century, and in 1896 she met a man named Erasmus Stribling Strout Shue. He was a blacksmith. Depending on the source, you'll see him referred to by several different names, including Edward Shue, E.S. Shue, and Trout Shue. Zona and Shue married in October of 1896. The marriage would only last a few months, and that short marriage would eventually become one of the most famous murder stories in West Virginia. But there was already one person who wasn't particularly happy about the marriage: Zona's mother. Mary Jane Heaster reportedly didn't trust Shue, and that becomes important later, because when Zona died, Mary Jane wasn't willing to accept the explanation she was given, and according to her own testimony, that refusal would eventually lead to a murder investigation. January 1897. Winter had settled over Greenbrier County. On the morning of January 23rd, Zona was found dead. The circumstances surrounding the discovery would later become one of the most important parts of the story. A local boy had been sent to the Shue home. When he arrived, he discovered Zona's body. Word quickly spread. Her husband, Edward Shue, was contacted, and a local physician and coroner, Dr. George Knapp, was called to examine the body. At first, Zona's death wasn't treated as murder. The initial explanation was essentially that she had died from natural causes. Historical accounts described the cause as an everlasting faint, with later records and reports giving different explanations. There was no completed autopsy at the time, and Zona was buried. That should have been the end of the story. A young woman had died unexpectedly, her family buried her husband mourned her, and life in Greenbrier County moved on. Except, Mary Jane Heaster couldn't let it go. Something about her daughter's death didn't feel right, and then, according to Mary Jane, Zona came back. Mary Jane Heaster later told a remarkable story. She said that her daughter appeared to her, not as a vague shadow, not as some indistinct figure standing across a room. Mary Jane described Zona as appearing in the dress she had been buried in. According to her account, Zona told her mother that she had been murdered, and she named the person responsible, her husband, Edward Shue. Mary Jane claimed that Zona told her that Edward had attacked her during an argument. She described him grabbing her by the throat, and she claimed that he had broken her neck. Now let's stop here for a second, because this is where the story becomes difficult to separate from the folklore that grew around it. There are many versions of the Greenbrier ghost story. Some say Zona appeared 4 nights in a row. Others describe more specific details about exactly what happened during each visitation. The historical record does establish that Mary Jane testified about her daughter's alleged appearance and what she said Zona told her. But over more than a century, the story has been retold, embellished, dramatized, and turned into one of Appalachia's most famous ghost legends. So tonight, we're going to separate the documented history from the legend as much as possible, because the documented history is already strange enough. Mary Jane took this story seriously, very seriously. She went to authorities and insisted that her daughter's death needed another look, and eventually, Greenbrier County prosecutor John Alfred Preston became involved. Whether Preston personally believed in ghosts isn't clear, but he had something more important than a ghost story. He had a reason to question the original examination. The first examination of Zona's body had been limited, and if there was even a possibility that the young woman had been murdered, there was only one way to find out. Zona's body would have to be exhumed. Think about that. It's one thing to tell someone that you believe your dead daughter was murdered. It's another thing entirely to convince authorities to dig her up from her grave and examine her body weeks after the funeral. But that's what happened. Zona's grave was opened, her body was removed, and an autopsy was performed. The examination changed everything. According to historical accounts, doctors found evidence of severe injuries to Zona's neck. Her neck had been broken, her windpipe had been crushed, and there were indications of trauma to her throat. Suddenly, the story about the ghost wasn't just a ghost story, because the injuries were consistent with the basic accusation Mary Jane said Zona had made. Her daughter had supposedly told her Edward had attacked her and broken her neck, and now the medical examination indicated that Zona's neck had in fact been broken. That's the part of the story that has haunted people for more than a century, because there are really only a few possibilities. Either Zona's mother invented the story and somehow gave investigators information that matched the injuries, or Mary Jane had learned information about her daughter's death from somewhere else, or the story exactly is what generations of West Virginians have believed it was. Zona came back. Edward Shue was arrested and charged with murdering his wife. And once investigators began looking into his life, more questions emerged. Shue had been married before. His previous relationships became part of the discussion surrounding the case, and his behavior after Zona's death was scrutinized. But here's something important. The case wasn't simply, a ghost said he did it, therefore he's guilty. That's the way the story is often presented today. The actual legal case was more complicated. There was physical evidence from the exhumation. There were questions surrounding Zona's death. There was testimony about Shue's behavior. And there was the testimony of Mary Jane Heaster. The ghost story became part of the courtroom record because the defense questioned Mary Jane about it. And Mary Jane didn't back down. She maintained her story. She said her daughter's spirit had appeared to her. She said Zona had identified her husband, and she described what she claimed her daughter had told her about the murder. June of 1897, Edward Shue stood trial in Greenbrier County. The courthouse was filled with people, and the story had already spread. A young woman was dead, her husband accused of killing her. Her mother claimed that her daughter's ghost had returned to identify the killer, and now the case was being heard in a courtroom. Imagine being one of those jurors. You're sitting there in 1897, there's no DNA testing, no modern forensic science, no surveillance footage, no cell phones, no crime scene reconstruction, and then the mother takes the stand and tells you that her dead daughter came to her and revealed how she was murdered. Would you believe her? Would you dismiss her? Or would you listen, especially knowing that an examination of the body had revealed a broken neck? Mary Jane was questioned extensively, and according to historical accounts, she remained firm in her story. The ghost itself obviously couldn't testify, but the mother's account of the supposed visitation became part of the testimony, and the case captured the public's imagination. The jury eventually found Edward Shue guilty of murder. He was sentenced to life in prison. And this is where the story becomes even darker, because some people weren't satisfied with a life sentence. A mob reportedly formed with the intention of taking Shue from custody and lynching him. Authorities intervened. Shue was ultimately taken away and sent to the West Virginia State Penitentiary in Moundsville. The man accused of killing Zona would spend the rest of his life behind prison walls. But Zona's story didn't end there, and neither did Edward Shue's. Edward Shue died in the West Virginia State Penitentiary in 1900. He had only spent a few years in prison. His death meant that the man convicted of Zona's murder would never tell his own version of events in a courtroom again. And that leaves us with an uncomfortable question. Was the right man convicted? The evidence certainly pointed toward Shue, but the case wasn't a modern forensic investigation. It was a 19th century murder trial. And much of what we know today comes from newspapers, historical accounts, court records, and a story that has been retold for generations. The Greenbrier ghost became bigger than the trial itself. Today, a historical marker near the cemetery where Zona is buried commemorates the story. Her grave bears the name Zona Heaster Shue, but she's better known by another name, the Greenbrier Ghost. The West Virginia Encyclopedia describes the case as the only known instance in which testimony from a ghost helped convict a murderer. The story has become part of West Virginia folklore, and it's easy to understand why. It's got everything a ghost story needs: a mysterious death, a grieving mother, a restless spirit, a murder, an exhumed body, a shocking autopsy, a courtroom, and a killer supposedly exposed by the dead. But what if the ghost wasn't the important part? What if Mary Jane knew something? Let's consider another explanation. Maybe Mary Jane didn't actually see Zona's ghost. Maybe she dreamed about her. Maybe grief caused her to experience something that felt completely real. Or maybe Mary Jane already suspected Edward. Remember, she reportedly hadn't trusted him from the beginning. Perhaps she noticed things about her daughter's relationship that other people didn't. Perhaps Zona had told her something before her death. Perhaps Mary Jane had seen evidence that something wasn't right. And perhaps the ghost story was the only way she could get authorities to take another look at her daughter's death. There's another possibility. Maybe Mary Jane simply believed what she said. Maybe she genuinely thought her daughter's spirit had visited her. And that's important, because believing that someone saw a ghost doesn't necessarily mean that person was lying. Human beings experience grief in completely powerful ways, especially when someone dies suddenly. Mary Jane may have sincerely believed Zona came to her, and yet, that doesn't explain everything, because the autopsy found the broken neck. So let's imagine for a moment that there was no ghost. How did Mary Jane know? That's the question that has kept this story alive. If she invented the story, why did she describe an injury that medical examination later supported? Could she have known that Zona had been strangled? Could she have suspected it? Could someone have told her? Or was the information already apparent to people who had seen Zona's body? And remember, the original examination was limited. The medical evidence wasn't available to Mary Jane through modern forensic science. Yet her story and the autopsy seem to overlap. That's the coincidence at the center of the entire legend. So let's strip away the ghost story for a moment. Here's what we can say with much more confidence. Zona Heaster Shue was a real woman. She married Edward Shue in 1896. She died in January of 1897. Her death was initially treated as natural. Her mother, Mary Jane Heaster, later claimed that Zona's spirit appeared to her and accused Edward of murder. Authorities reopened the case. Zona's body was exhumed. An examination found serious injuries to her neck. Edward Shue was arrested. He was tried for murder. He was convicted. He was sentenced to life imprisonment, and he died in prison in 1900. There are the bones of the story. And everything else, that's where history and folklore begin to overlap. Maybe not murder. But there's something undeniably fascinating about this case, because regardless of whether you believe in ghosts, a woman died. Her death was initially dismissed as natural. Her mother refused to accept that explanation. An investigation followed, her body was exhumed, and evidence was discovered that indicated she had suffered a fatal injury to her neck. Then the man of accusing her was convicted. That's real history. The ghost? That's the mystery. And perhaps that's exactly why the story survived, because there is no easy answer. If you believe in the supernatural, the Greenbrier ghost is a story about a murdered woman who refused to let her killer escape justice. If you don't believe in ghosts, it's a story about a grieving mother whose determination forced authorities to look closer at a suspicious death. And honestly, both versions are disturbing. More than a century later, Zona Heaster Shue still has a presence in Greenbrier County. Her grave remains, the courthouse where her murder trial took place still stands, and the story of the woman who supposedly returned from the dead to name her killer has become part of West Virginia folklore. Maybe Zona really did return. Maybe Mary Jane dreamed her daughter's final moments. Maybe she knew more than she ever admitted. Or maybe, somewhere between the living and the dead, the truth has been lost. But one thing is certain, Zona Heaster Shue wasn't just a ghost story. She was a real woman, a young woman whose life ended far too soon. And whether her mother heard her daughter's voice from beyond the grave, or found another way to make sure somebody listened, the story accomplished one thing: Zona wasn't forgotten. And perhaps that's the real reason the Greenbrier ghost still walks through Appalachian history more than 125 years later. So, what do you believe? Did Zona really visit her mother, or did Mary Jane know the truth all along? Let me know in the comments. And if you enjoyed tonight's story, make sure you subscribe to Appalachian After Dark for more stories from the darker side of Appalachia. Until next time, keep your porch lights on, keep your doors locked, and if you hear someone calling your name from the woods, don't answer.